Allow me to kick us off.
Please.
I have been playing a game, or not so much a game, but a demo and a prologue demo of a game called Metaphor ReFantazio. Checked name, nailed it.
Nice.
I've decided to get on board the latest Atlas game, which is from the team who put the Persona series together, specifically the director, Katsuru Hashino, who is the director of a lot of the, I believe, the Persona games and brought along a lot of the team to work on this one. This, however, is a sort of a sidestep to that in the sense that it feels very much the formula of Persona, but it is set in a new world, new characters, which I guess Persona always does. But this is in basically a fantasy setting, whereas the Persona games were always to do with sort of modern Japanese settings with school kids and that kind of stuff. Whereas here, you are in a traditional Western fantasy, I guess you would call it, with, you know, knights, wizards, dragons, fairies, etc. But it all has that Persona, what the fuck's going on kind of energy to it. The story, from what I know in this, the prologue, I believe, is up to sort of 6 hours and your progress carries through, and I'm about 5 hours into it. So there's a lot there for free if you want to try this out. The story so far, you take control of this blue-head boy, who you name your own name. You are on a mission from a prince, from a kingdom. The prince is in a coma, has been put under a spell. You are sent to the capital. It's your job to infiltrate the corrupt politics of that city, to infiltrate the military and assassinate potentially a corrupt political leader who has killed the king. I guess that's the best way I could give you the opening of it, because like any Atlas game, it does its storytelling and its exposition incredibly Persona-y, which is to say, it just kind of gives you bits and pieces of narrative. It gives you beautiful, full animated, hand-drawn anime cutscenes. It then jumps to in-game cutscenes. It then stops you at every fucking 5 seconds to transition to a new version of that cutscene. And so it just like, it feels like 6 art departments are all fighting for the lead of who could tell this story best. That said, you just need to let yourself fall into it, and a couple of hours in, I was actually finding myself quite intrigued by the world building. It's done very amazingly. I love it when a Japanese developer in particular takes on a Western fantasy, a la your Dark Souls and things like that, because they have such interesting takes on how to build those worlds. In this case, you've got quite a modern fantasy city with all these different races of people that are all ticking your sort of fantasy races. You've got pointy ears, you've got horns, you've got furries. They've all got interesting names. Furries. You've got all these different types, but they like
every fetish is catered to.
It is that. Yay. It is that. It's a bit horny, as it should be. But there within that is the sort of a sort of maelstrom of distrust between races.
So this is like Dune the anime.
No, not so much Dune. They're just in a desert.
It looks like it.
They're in a desert, sure.
Yep,
but
Dune.
you've got a lot of sort of racism between all the different groups and classism and all that sort of stuff, which is slowly unfolding as the story unfolds. Moving on from that, the most important and interesting part of the game, like Persona, is actually the combat, is actually the gameplay. Broken down, it really is just third-person exploration where you run through dungeons and sort of very, very linear areas. You have enemy encounters where you then, if you wouldn't mind skipping forward a little bit, Josh, let me finish. You basically run around, you run into mobs of enemies. You can attack them in real time to get an advantage, and eventually when you're more powerful, you will just clear those mobs without starting the battle state, the turn-based battle state. But once you engage with the enemy, you try to get a chance attack, and then it just turns into that fucking great Persona-y style, you know, turn-based, very quick action prompts, style dripping out of everywhere, and you're...
Ew.
Well, it is. It is just every menu, every bit of HUD. I should hate everything that's going on here aesthetically, but I love that there's too much to criticize, so it's all great. It's like, there's too much going on, and
You've
then...
said the exact same thing about a Persona game in the past. I can't remember which one it was. Like,
Persona
it was
3,
full Golden or something?
Persona 3 got a re-release, and I played that. And yeah, for all the things I would really find a contentious point in other game development, I just think they lean so hard into it aesthetically and also from a gameplay perspective that it just ends up being incredibly enjoyable.
Like, what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, it's literally that. And you know, and then before you know it, you're meeting these little ragtag characters, which are so like, they're just so like, oh, this is my life, and I'm gonna talk like no other character ever would in any other medium, and I just ate it all up. I love their little backstories. I love their motivations. The fact that the probably biggest sort of parallel to a Persona game is within the combat, you have the ability to activate an archetype, and that's your sort of powered up version of yourself. Much like in Persona, can't remember the Persona games, they're so batshit, but it was like you can unleash your personas and you can have different versions of them. Here, you do it by, when you discover your archetype, instead of Persona 3 where you shoot yourself in the head, or Persona 5 where you just do a magical dance or something, here you reach into your chest and you pull out your heart, which is actually a metal speakerphone with cables, veins running into your chest that you then talk into like a walkie-talkie, and you say, "I am unleashing the power of my archetype." And then you turn
That
into
was
a
me
giant...
last week.
Yeah, exactly. You turn into a giant sort of transformed version of either a knight or a magician or something or other. It's just nuts, and I love it. I just straight away was like eating up the combat. It was grindy. I needed to keep grinding all these mobs to get better, to power up enough to take on the first boss, and it felt unfair, and I didn't care. I just kept plowing on. So, yeah, I think this is getting amazing reviews. I think it's a strong appeal for people who love the Persona series, and they are diehards. But I've heard a lot of people mention, and something I agree with, this is a good entry point. This is them going with a different, I guess, series. You would call maybe the Metaphor series now versus the Persona ones. I'm sure there'll be spin-offs and sequels to this. But I just think it all fits the fantasy setting really well. While I liked the style of the Personas being in like modern day Tokyo and all the jazz and all the cool school settings, I guess I found that school setting and the sort of naivete of all the characters a bit grinding after a while. Whereas here, it feels right in a fantasy setting to have a lot of characters with way too much backstory and very larger than life kind of motivation. So yeah, I think it's really good. I'm gonna keep playing through the prologue, and then when it hits that point that says buy the full game, which I think I'm probably an hour away from, I am definitely hitting buy.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about Atlas. They just know how to make UI look just incredible.
The pause menu I showed off to Josh before, and I was like, every time you clicked down through a different thing, it changed every font. As you scrolled down, they all changed.
It's ridiculous.
Changed the whole menu font,
So
everything,
intense.
or they all went from serif to sans serif.
Imagine them
to
trying
like,
to get this Steam Deck approved.
Oh, mate,
fuck
the
no.
verification process.
Well, I played on
Damn.
Steam Deck, and it did say warning, text is a little smaller than it should be on this
no
one.
way,
So
did it actually? That's so
100%,
good.
100%.
That's great.
So, yeah, I've actually never finished a Persona game because they are huge and they are an undertaking.
I never started one. My girlfriend was obsessed, and I've seen it so much.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, "Oh, you're gonna love it. You love that stuff." And I'm like, "No, but maybe this is the time."
5 is the one that everyone says. Persona 5 Golden is the one that everyone rates. I think this has just learnt every lesson from the Persona series and has now just given it a chance to put it under a new banner and just start a little bit fresh. And I think it's benefited from that massively because, yeah, there are still problems in terms of like just the running around in the world feels very, I don't know, light and floaty and sort of unpolished, but that's not the focus of the game. That's just getting you from A to B to enjoy the combat or to enjoy the story, and they know that, so they're not really, trying to polish elements of the game that no one cares about. Again, I love lovely fuck you from Atlas. They're like, we know it works, and we're just going to stick with it. So, it's cool. It's not going to make me go back and play Personas, but I'm gonna try and get through this because I know it's going to be an effort.
Yeah,
in terms of just quantity.
Yeah, and I think even you're saying that there's some pared back conceptual stuff from Persona that makes it an approachable entry point into the Atlas kind of game, and just being a Western fantasy is like talking to me, and this is just like middle-aged white guy thing, but like I've never really gelled with being Japanese school kids.
Yeah.
It's all just like a bit. It's just a bit.
Can't relate to it.
Well, obviously I can't have a personal relation with it, but I also find it weird how sexual Japanese games can be when they're about kids. And it's like, nah, I don't need that in my life.
They also
like,
really, they juggle, and I guess people would say, well, the fact that these kids in Persona games are dealing with larger-than-life threats to the world, and then they're like, gotta get to gym class, and you're like, I don't know, here, there's none of that. There just seems to be like, get on with our story because the world's in peril, and
Holy
we
fuck,
are...
there's a giant crew.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
all makes sense within the world. The last thing I forgot to mention, actually, which I thought was quite clever, and I don't know how much this turns into a larger part of the game, but in the story, your character is carrying around a book, and in that book they're reading from it, and it tells a
Is
tale.
small Japanese school children.
Oh God.
Death Note.
From what he's reading the book, and the book is about a world he's never experienced, and that world is made of metal and steel and has towering buildings
No.
and
Steampunk?
It's gonna be some Terry Brooks shit.
well, it's more to do with there are vehicles that transport people, and there are things called humans in it, and to them, that's fantasy. And so then they're like, "What is a
Like, and
human?"
there's a man called Gus, and he's almost 40, and
He's
he's
talking
playing
about
a
us
game
right now.
called Metaphor ReFantazio.
But there's a little bit of that. You meet the author, and it's like people are asking about this weird fantasy book you read, and it's like it's a weird hat on a hat. But I'm like, I wonder how that plays into it later
That
on.
man, Ernest Hemingway.
But I was
Yeah.
like, when it started, I was like, that's kind of cool. Like in a fantasy world,
Yeah.
in Lord of the Rings, what do they read as their like escapism? And they're like, oh, a weird future
Yeah,
world.
Maybe
I
it's
would-
some Crestomancy level shit. Maybe there's like alternate universe stuff going on. That'd be sick. We need
I would love
Crestomancy.
if the game literally ended with the main character closing the book, looking directly in the camera, and going, "Did you enjoy the game?" I think that would be fun.
That's just a Dark Pictures game.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you, yeah, exactly. Oh,
Are
plus
you
all
having
the-
fun, kids?
Plus, all the characters vape.
yeah.
Oh, really?
All the fantasy
is this for
characters,
real or
all
is
the
this a
fantasy
bit?
characters
In
in
the
the
game?
town are like vaping, and I was
That's
like, I guess
awesome.
that's now what smoking is. So in a world where characters would smoke pipes, they're just like, I guess they're all vaping. Plus, I think you get a hoverboard at one point. I might fall off it, but for now, I'm having fun. It's cool. Metaphor ReFantazio.
Nice.